No event in the ancient world was comparable to the Olympic Games. They were held every 4 years and without a break for nearly 12 centuries. The Games were almost 800 years old when Jesus Christ was born. And it took a special Christian edict to stop them 4 centuries after his death. The ancient Olympics were abandoned and long forgotten, but returned in our modern age as the inspiration for the most prestigious sporting event on Earth. What gave these ancient games their extraordinary magnetism, their endurance, and the power to rise again 1400 years after their demise? When Greek culture and influence were at their height, the ancient Olympic Games drew tens of thousands of people by road and sea from Greek colonies scattered along the entire length of the Mediterranean and the shores of the Black Sea, all the way between the future lands of Russia and Spain. No other recurring event in the ancient world attracted so many people to a single destination. Aristocrats on horseback or riding chariots, the poor on donkeys, carts or on foot, food sellers and merchants loaded with supplies, all traveling in the heat of high summer towards Olympia, the permanent site of the Games, in a remote corner of the Peloponnese, and in those days, far from any important city. Here, athletes rub shoulders with poets and actors vying for applause, cheapjacks hiring out tents, huts, charms and potions, acrobats and conjurers performing tricks, traders plying food and drink. The heat, noise, dust, flies and overcrowding must have been intolerable. The Olympic village of old was a shanty town at the edge of a sacred site. At the heart of Olympia, the Temple of Zeus, dedicated to the supreme god of Greek mythology. According to legend, Zeus took possession of this place after hurling a thunderbolt from the summit of mighty cloud-capped Mount Olympus, where he had sat enthroned. A colossal statue of the god, fashioned in ivory and gold, dominated the temple dedicated to his name, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The original Olympic Games were sacred, a religious ritual performed every 4 years. At the second full moon after the summer solstice, a black ram was slaughtered and its blood poured into the earth. This marked the start of the Games. The days at Olympia were crowded, with athletes and spectators rising early. The entire event lasted only 5 days, and half of that time was spent in sacrifice and worship. All the competitions were crowded into the rest. This is the running track at Olympia, the oldest surviving sports stadium in the world. When the Games were at their height, 40,000 people packed in here. There was no seating, just bare banks, and although it was the hottest time of the year in Greece, no overhead cover. To make matters really unpleasant, an official police corps, Aliti, were ready to flog any spectator or athlete who stepped out of line. The first athletes to make their triumphal entry into the stadium were the superstars of the ancient games, the sprinters. The entire games would be named after the winner of this race. Not the Sydney or the Atlanta or the Barcelona Olympics, but your Olympics if you took first place. At the very first Olympics in 776 BC, the sprint was the only event of the Games. It took 60 years to add another 2 races, a double length and 24 lengths of the stadium. There was no circuit here, as in a modern track. For the longer distances, the runners had to negotiate turning posts at either end wide enough to stop anyone gripping and swinging round. But it was a hazardous maneuver, with accidents and skullduggery shrouded in the all-pervading dust. "200 years would elapse before another running event was introduced to the Games, the race in armor, the Hoplitodromos. The first field events were introduced as elements in the pentathlon, and it's fascinating to see how much ancient techniques differed from the modern.
We shouldn't imagine a discus poised in a circle and doing some nice, neat rotational turns and slinging this nice aerodynamic thing into the distance. It wasn't like that. It was much more of a strength event.
What the Greeks probably did was a single action. And you're really relying not so much on technique as strength in your arm. The javelin was thrown with an amentum or ankyle, ancient words, for the thong. There was a thong that was wrapped around the javelin. And you threw it essentially with the same technique, but the thong produced a rifling effect.
The long jumpers were different too. They were clearly jumping for distance, but they were also jumping for form, jumping for style. Try to imagine music in the background, because there are lots of pictures on vase paintings of flute players in the background. It seems that they competed to music. Precisely what it did and whether they had to be synchronized with that music is very, very hard to tell.
What's remarkable about it and what has fascinated moderns is they had jumping weights, what are called halteres, in stone or metal, one in each hand, that you used as you ran up. You sort of alternated and swung them, and as you took off, you're taking extra weight. It's counterintuitive, it shouldn't work. But what it's doing, after you get to the top of your jump, you start pushing back with these and actually jettison them.
If you get a modern athlete to jump with weights and discard them partway through the jump, then they usually make a mess of it. It's not the modern event with weights, it's a completely different event.
It will not produce some of the supposed records of antiquity. There's supposedly a 55-foot jump, and that has led some people to feel there was multiple jumps and so forth. What it is an athletic tall tale, which is inherent with athletics. We always make up tales. But all of this with no electronic scoreboard, no stopwatch, no calculator, nothing, keeping the crowd interested and entertained and getting it all done without any serious problems, when we today can't do this at a high school meet without difficulties.
Wrestling was the fourth element in the ancient pentathlon. Boxing was introduced 20 years later, to be followed in 648 BC by the pancration, a form of all-in wrestling where virtually anything was permitted: kicking, wrestling throws, strangleholds, pressure locks, and boxing. But the most spectacular new addition of this era was the chariot race, which robbed the sprint of its proud position as the opening event of the Games. The athletes took no part in this. Charioteers were usually the slaves of wealthy aristocrats who could afford the phenomenal cost of breeding and transporting horses at that time. Over the centuries, the ancient games evolved from a local event with just one foot race to the most prestigious festival in the ancient world. Olympia needed 900 years to attain its full glory, a magnificent complex of temples, gymnasia, racetracks, and workshops covering 60 acres. And it took the collapse of an empire, barbarian invasions, and a Christian edict forbidding further use of pagan structures to bring the games down. To hammer that message home, a church was built slap bang in the middle of Phidias's workshop, where the mighty statue of Zeus had been created. A century later, the entire site was destroyed by earthquake and a flood which buried the ruins in silt. Olympia would be completely hidden for the next 1,200 years.